My name is Connie Miller. I'm currently in my early 40s, but this happened in the fall of 1999 when I was 14. My neighborhood sat on the western edge of a small Massachusetts town, not one of the famous historic ones that tourists visit, but close enough to the old colonial routes that the surrounding woods still carried some weight. It's the kind of place where kids biked everywhere, and parents only started worrying once the streetlights came on. That October afternoon was crisp. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp leaves. I had stayed late for an after-school program, and on the walk home I decided to cut through the forest instead of taking the long way around, which is the way I usually went, because I would normally walk home with my friends. But I was alone that day. The woods bordered the back of our subdivision. A girl I had never seen before stepped out from between two trees. At first, I thought she was just another kid from school. She looked to be around my age, but her dress was all wrong. It was dark, almost black wool, high-collared, long-sleeved, with a heavy skirt that brushed the ground. At the time, I thought it was strange. I didn't realize how outdated her outfit was. It was like something my grandmother would have worn to church in the 1950s. The girl's face was a bit pale, but otherwise looked normal. "Hi," she said, smiling like we had known each other forever. "My name is Ashley. You live up the road, right?" I blinked as she fell into step beside me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We must be neighbors." I had lived in that neighborhood for my entire life, and I knew everyone on my street. I had never seen this girl before, but maybe a new family had moved in, and I just didn't notice. We walked together toward the neighborhood entrance. She asked about my classes and complained about how long this walk was. We kept chatting as we turned onto our street. The sun began dipping low, casting long shadows across the lawns. Then Ashley disappeared. 1 second her shoulder was brushing mine. The next, the space beside me was empty. "Ashley?" I called out. No answer. That's when I heard it. A little girl scream. High, piercing, and full of raw pain. It came from somewhere near the tree line behind the houses, but I couldn't see anyone. It didn't sound like someone playing. It sounded like someone dying in agony. The scream rose and cut off sharply, then came again, weaker this time. Like whatever was making it was being dragged away. I ran, backpack slamming against my back, sneakers pounding the pavement, all the way back home. I didn't tell my parents the full story, just that I had heard something scary in the woods. They blamed my imagination and the approaching Halloween season. I avoided that path afterward. By winter, I had almost convinced myself that it was just a weird daydream. Years passed. I moved away for college and then work. Last summer, I was back home visiting my family when I ran into Mr. Coffee at the downtown cafe. He had been the town librarian when I was a kid. He was tall, soft-spoken, and was always recommending local history books. He was now 82 years old, and he walked with a cane. But his eyes lit up when he recognized me. I wasn't with anyone, so we sat together and caught up over some coffee. Somehow the conversation drifted to childhood memories, and I found myself telling him about that afternoon in 1999. The girl in the dark dress, how she vanished, and that awful scream. He listened to my story with a serious expression. "You grew up on Elm Court?" he asked. When I confirmed, he told me the neighborhood had been built in the early 1960s, right on top of old foundations. The entire western side of town sat on what used to be a small colonial settlement. During King Philip's War in the 1670s, native warriors swept through, burning the settlement to the ground, killing or carrying off settlers. The survivors fled, and the site lay abandoned for centuries. By the 1950s, when Mr. Coffey was a boy, the ruins were still there, charred stone cellars and crumbling chimneys. Some of those people never made it out of the fire, or the woods for that matter. Mr. Coffey then apologized for being so intense, but told me he believed that I encountered a ghost that day. My parents still live in that neighborhood. Whenever I visit, I sometimes walk down that old forest path. I haven't seen or heard anything since that day over 25 years ago, but that scream is something I'll never forget. This happened back in 2007. I was 22 years old and on vacation in Florida with a group of friends. We stayed in Zephyr Hills, a small town that doesn't have much going on, except for its municipal airport where people go skydiving. One of your recent stories took place in this town, and since you also cover paranormal encounters, I decided to type this up and share it. The others in my group were planning on skydiving, not me. No amount of money could get me to jump out of an airplane. I've always preferred camping, hiking, fishing, etc. So while I went to the drop zone, I decided to do a solo overnight camping trip in the woods. My friend Mike dropped me off late that afternoon near a bridge off of Highway 39. I rented a cheap tent, sleeping bag, and a portable skillet in town. The area I was in was part of the Upper Hillsborough Preserve, which runs along the Hillsborough River. Despite its name, that river technically begins in Pasco County, which is where I was. I told Mike I would find a spot along the river, camp for the night, and call him the next morning. He thought I was crazy for camping alone, but I thought the rest of them were crazy for jumping out of an airplane. So we wished each other luck and went our separate ways. The forest was full of pines and palmettos. The humidity near the river was brutal. I followed the trails for about 40 minutes until I found a nice clearing roughly 20 yards from the water. It felt perfect. I set up my tent, cooked some hot dogs on the portable skillet. There was a burn ban in effect, no campfires, and watched the sky turn from orange to black. By 10 o'clock, I was zipped up inside my tent. Something woke me up a little after 2 a.m. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching on leaves and twigs. It didn't sound like an animal. I laid there frozen, heart pounding. As the steps circled nearby, they would pause, then start again. Like whatever it was wandering aimlessly. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" I swept my beam around, but saw nothing but trees and the river reflecting my light. I stayed close to my tent. Then, the footsteps began again, this time on the opposite side of the river. I saw a shape stumbling out of the trees. "Show yourself." It then came into the light. It was a man with no head. Just a body wearing jeans and a jacket, but above the shoulders there was just nothing. According to most paranormal accounts I've read over the years, headless apparitions usually move with the normalcy of a living person. This apparition did not behave in the same way. It appeared to be stumbling around like it couldn't see. I know this may seem like a strange thing to say, but it was like it actually had no head. Its movements were erratic. It jerked forward, then suddenly halted, before changing directions without warning. Its hands were blindly groping at tree branches, trying to steady itself as it staggered along. "What the fuck?" I called out, but the thing didn't stop moving. It just kept stumbling toward the river. I stood there, dumbfounded, my light fixed on the impossibility just yards away, grateful that a river was separating us. It eventually made it to the river bank, where it tripped on a rock and fell into the water. It was a little further down the river, so I ran to the spot where it fell in and shined my light into the water, but saw no signs of anything. I ran back to my tent. Words cannot describe how confused and terrified I was. I zipped it shut like it would help, killed my light, and sat there shaking for what felt like hours. I didn't hear the footsteps again, but that did nothing for the panic attack I was having. I tried to calm myself down, but I ended up calling Mike around 4 a.m., whispering into my phone like an idiot. He was half asleep when he answered, but when he heard the panic in my voice, he woke up fast. He met me back at the bridge about an hour later. I didn't tell him the full story on the drive back to the hotel, just that something had scared the shit out of me. He didn't push it. The next morning we had to go back for the camping gear. I was in such a hurry when I left that I didn't bother packing anything up. I felt much better having someone with me this time around. The tent was exactly as I had left it. The sleeping bag was still inside the tent, and the skillet was sitting on top of a log. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to laugh off the incident for the rest of the trip. I ended up telling the guys that it was a bear, but they all figured that I was just being a chicken shit, which made no sense because I had been solo camping several times before this. On our last night in town, we were at this dive bar having drinks. I ended up talking to an off-duty cop after a game of pool. He was an older guy who had lived in the area for his whole life. After a couple of beers, I casually asked him if there had been any murders or strange deaths out in the woods by 39. He thought about it and said, "Not that I've ever heard of, but that preserve is huge, thousands of acres of forest, and lots of swamp areas that are hard to reach. If someone wanted to hide a body out there, they would have to drag it through the woods from the highway. And we always look for suspicious vehicles parked along the roads. It's unlikely, but not impossible." That night sparked my interest in the paranormal, and I've read about a lot of ghostly encounters over the years, but I've never heard of an encounter quite like mine. Most stories that involve headless spirits never mention that spirit being affected by having no head. The entity I encountered was somehow bound by its missing anatomy, moving through the forest blind and disoriented. I have thought about that night a lot over the years. I think a long time ago someone was killed out there. Perhaps they were then dragged into the woods, and their head was removed at some point. Spirits do often reenact the movements that were part of a routine, or something they did just before they died. They are often referred to as residual hauntings, or an echo. I don't think this is the case because it would be nearly impossible for this to happen, but it's a very disturbing thought to think that I witnessed an echo of an unusually long reflexive action that took place after a backwoods decapitation, where a beheaded body stood up and stumbled aimlessly through the forest before plummeting into the river. I grew up in New Orleans until my parents moved us to Austin, Texas when I was around 15. For context, my mom's side of the family has always been deep into voodoo and black magic for generations. Root work, readings, altars in the back rooms, etc. My father is a hardline Baptist, so when I was a kid, my mother would shut that world away, which caused a lot of problems. Her family was very upset that she turned her back on the family legacy over a, quote, Bible thumper. In 2017, when I was in my early 20s, we got the news that my grandmother was dying. so my mom and I flew back to New Orleans to visit her. One evening, my aunt pulled me aside in the kitchen while my mom was in the front room. She was my mom's older sister, and the only one who still openly practiced. While we were catching up, she casually asked if I was seeing anyone. I told her the truth, a few dates here and there, but nothing serious. I was 21, in college, and was focused on my future. My aunt set her coffee down and looked me directly in the eye. "You need to find somebody before 30. Married, babies. Don't play with this. The women in this family, we don't get to walk that road alone past 30. Not without consequences." I actually laughed in her face. I told her I wasn't going to rush into marriage and kids just because some old superstitious nonsense. I was going to be a lawyer, and I was going to build my own life. She just nodded slowly, the way that people do when you're making a big mistake, but you're just too proud to hear it. My grandmother passed away that year, and my aunt passed away 2 years after, in 2019. Fast forward to now. I turned 30 in February. I'm a brand new associate at a solid law firm here in Austin. Finally starting to feel like all those long nights and student loans were worth it. I have my own house, a good circle of friends, and zero interest in settling down just to check a box. I was proud of that. Until the dreams started. The first one was the night after I turned 30. I was back in my grandmother's old house. Something with too many joints was crawling across the ceiling, calling out my name in a very disturbing voice. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. I told myself it was just the stress, but the nightmares kept coming, each one worse than the next. Eventually, things began happening when I was awake. Scratching inside the walls, whispering voices from the air vents, footsteps in the hallway. I would catch a movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark blur that vanished as soon as I turned my head. I called up my mom. When I told her what was happening, she got real quiet and told me to come back home for a visit. She wouldn't say anything else over the phone. I was busy with work assignments, and I couldn't visit her until the following weekend. After Dad had gone to bed, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the truth. Her voice was low and tired, like she had been dreading this conversation for years. "What your aunt told you, your grandmother also told to me, and I dismissed it just like you. I grew up around superstition from the old folks, but I still got married to your father at 21 and had you by 23. I just happened to fall in love at the right time. But the stories about the women in our family who waited, something always came for them. Some got sick, some lost their minds, and some just disappeared. The thing that shows up is different for each of them, but it always starts after their 30th birthday. I tried to pull us out of that life. That's part of the reason we moved to Texas. I raised you Christian, kept you away from all that. But deep down, a part of me always knew. Blood remembers." I left my mom's house still unconvinced. The last Tuesday, I was working late on a case. I got home around 11:30, kicked off my heels, and walked into the kitchen. There's a dining room mirror that hangs on the far wall that gives a clear view into the kitchen before you reach it. In the reflection was a tall, dark figure. It had its back turned to me. It had broad shoulders under what looked like an old coat, and two thick, curved horns rising from its head. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, completely still. I screamed so loud I tore my throat. I ran out of the front door with my bare feet, and when I finally gathered myself, I called up my friend Lauren and spent the night at her place. I'm back at my place now during the day. The figure hasn't appeared again, but I can still feel it watching me. I just want to make one thing perfectly clear before I end my story. I'm not posting this to tell young women that they need to get married and have kids by age 30. I'm very proud of the life I've built. I love my independence, I love my career, and I worked my ass off for it. But my family has a history that can't be ignored. Something ancient has followed me from New Orleans, and now I'm just wondering if I'm already too late.